Eleanor Yick, and I am the current, my name is Eleanor Yick, and I'm the current Vice President of the League of Women Voters of Southwest Santa Clara Valley, which covers the cities of Saratoga, Los Gatos, Montecito, and Campbell. We are one of 5 leagues in Santa Clara County. As most of you probably know, the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization, which means we never endorse or oppose any candidate or political party. But we do advocate and educate about issues which we have studied and we feel are important for the voting public to know and understand. And that is the basis for today's program. And now I would like to introduce Wade Ellis, a longtime member of our league, who will be our moderator for today's program. Wade? You're muted.
Good morning. One of the things as moderator that I need to tell you is that please keep yourself muted during the webinar. Please type all questions in the chat room. These questions will be reviewed by me, the moderator, possibly grouped together and then presented to one or both of our speakers after both presentations. Next slide, please. The agenda is as follows. We're well into the first 3 minutes. Welcome and introducing the moderator. Then I'll speak for 7 minutes about the general form of things. Then Dr. Gray and Ms. Cisneros-Diaz will speak. Then Dr. Weber will speak, and there will be questions and answers, and a closing by Eleanor Yick. Next slide. Whoops. There are 2 presentations. What is meant by racial justice, presented by Dulce Maria Gray and Ms. Rebecca Cisneros-Diaz. And the other presentation will be by Dr. Shirley Weber, what is California doing to solve racial problems? These 2 presentations are part of the set of webinars that the League of Women Voters is presenting over the next year. And there are 2 of them. The first one will be given by Ann Ravel on October 16th. The second will be given sometimes in November and will be about criminal justice. Next slide, please. Our first speaker in the first presentation is Dr. Dulce Maria Gray. Dr. Gray comes from a long line of immigrants who have moved widely in the world, and that is one reason why she felt compelled to complete a doctoral program in cultural global studies. She has taught literature, composition, American studies, feminist theories, and critical theories to undergraduates and graduate students at universities on the East Coast and the Midwest. For the last 17 years, she has been a faculty member in the English department, the Women's Gender and Queer Studies program, and the Social Justice Studies program at West Valley College, where she consistently delivers her courses in face-to-face, hybrid, and online modes. All of her teaching and scholarship is informed and guided by principles in global citizenship, feminist theories, and social justice theories. She is pleased to be here with you today. Our second presenter, next slide please, is Ms. Rebecca Cisneros-Diaz. Rebecca is a proud Mexican-American San Jose native. She is a first-generation American and a first-generation college graduate. She attended Lincoln High School and then went to St. Mary's College in Morocco, California, where she received her bachelor's degree in English. She went directly to the University of Vermont, where she earned her master's degree in rhetoric and composition. She has been teaching at West Valley College for over 20 years. For 13 years, she coordinated the Puente program, which works to increase the number of educationally disadvantaged students who enroll in four-year colleges and universities, earn college degrees, and return to the community as members and leaders to future generations. She has also taught in the Women, Gender, and Queer Studies Department for over a decade and is working on growing the Social Justice Department at West Valley College to include ethnic studies courses. She serves as a member to Puente students and is a devoted social justice edu activist. Currently, she is on sabbatical leave for a year, working on a post-baccalaureate certificate in ethnic studies at San Francisco State University. Next slide. So here is the first presentation, What is Meant by Racial Justice, a discussion of a variety of racial justice issues. We're on. There we go.
So good morning. Thank you for having us to participate in this important conversation. I'm Dulce Maria Gray.
And I'm Rebecca Cisneros-Diaz.
And today we are going to, next slide. And today we are going to talk about what we mean by social justice.
Thank you for having us. We'd like to begin with an Indigenous land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the ground and waters on which West Valley College is located is historically the home of the Ohlone, Tamien, Muecma, and other Indigenous peoples. They were the first to live, celebrate, lament, and sing upon the unceded land where we gather now, that Dr. Dulce Maria Gray and I are affiliated with. We acknowledge their painful history of genocide and forced removal from this territory, and we honor and respect Indigenous peoples in the past, present, and future, as well as their continuing presence in the homeland and in the diaspora. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and our aim to be more responsive and accountable to the needs of Indigenous peoples everywhere.
So our aim today is to define racial justice and injustice, to comment on those terms' relationship to social justice, including the terms equality versus equity and intersectionality, to consider examples of racial justice and injustice. And one example that we'll focus on is critical race theory. So the concept of categorizing people by race was invented by a few European anthropologists and naturalists in order to support their beliefs that some groups of people are superior to others. The concept began in 1735 with a publication by Linnaeus, in which he proposed that human beings be classified into four distinct colors or races. Europeans were white, Americans were reddish, Asians were tawny, and Africans were blackish. The term racial justice refers to fighting against that traditional concept of race and the laws and practices that have elevated the category whitish as superior.
So the definition of racial injustice is the systemic discrimination that disenfranchises particular races or ethnicities. The intentional and unintentional systems and policies that sustain racial inequity in social, political, and economic opportunities and human rights.
So the relationship of social justice to racial justice or injustice is kind of clear. So racial justice is a branch of social justice, the same way that gender justice is a branch of social justice. Social justice is a political and philosophical theory and practice that focuses on creating and maintaining equity among individuals and institutions in society. That is, Social justice refers to having equitable access to opportunities, resources, wealth, participation, privileges, and human rights. The United Nations uses this definition. Social justice is the view that everyone deserves equal economic, political, and social rights and opportunities.
So we feel it's very important to explain the difference between equality and equity. This is a basic concept in social justice studies. Equality is about getting the same things, about being equal, having equal access to rights, opportunities, and resources. So in short, it means same. Equity, on the other hand, is about providing what individuals need in order to access rights, opportunities, and resources, which means that equality may look different for each person, or what they need in order to achieve equality may be different. So together, equality and equity shape social justice. And this is a popular visual that helps explain the difference between the two. So if you see in the first box here, you'll see each person has the same crate in order to see over this barrier to peek at the ball game. So this is equality. They all have the same. But if you notice, each individual is of a different height. So do they really need the same in order to achieve equity? The next image shows equity, right? People getting what they need in order to have a view of this ball game. So this taller person doesn't need a crate at all. This person needs one, this person needs two. So this is equity. And in the third image, we have what we call liberation, right? Where we don't even need, where the systemic barrier has been removed. And so people don't need a crate at all, but rather the systemic barrier itself has been removed.
And could I add to that, that if you notice that fence goes from a fence that prevents people from seeing to a fence, a chain link fence that allows people to see. So it's not saying that you remove everything. It's saying that you remove to the needs of, so that will satisfy everybody.
Thank you. It's important to talk about intersectionality. That's a very important concept. It was coined by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, who's a legal scholar. And even though she's not the first to talk about concepts of intersectionality, she is the first to have coined this term. And a little bit of background about it, how she came to this term is based on cases that she was studying. And there was one case where Black women sued their employer for discrimination, and they lost the case because the company successfully proved that they did not employ racist practices because they hired African Americans. Upon closer examination, she found that the company only hired Black men and only hired Black women. So the company claimed they were neither sexist or racist. But Kimberly Crenshaw noticed, well, Black women are falling through the cracks here in being served. Their unique positionality is overlooked because a Black woman's experience is not the same as a Black man's experience because he is in what's considered the privileged sex or gender. And a Black woman's experience with sexism is not the same as a white woman's experience with sexism because white women are in the privileged racial category. And I should say white passing women, someone who looks white. And so Kimberly Crenshaw said, we have to look at the different ways that our identity markers, we refer to these as different identity markers that may disenfranchise us. And so intersectionality, it helps me think of it as a visual. If you have to cross a street, but you only have to cross one street with very little traffic, that is something that you can do. But if you have different identity markers that have historically been placed people in an oppressed situation, then you're standing in the middle of a busy intersection. And these different systems can interlock and make it very difficult for you to, have equal opportunity. I do like to quote Audre Lorde, who has a very famous quotation, and she was African-American, Indigenous, poet, in a same-sex relationship, mother of two, and her famous quotation is, "There is no single issue struggle because we don't live single issue lives." And so if we want true social justice, we have to acknowledge all of these different identity markers simultaneously. Some well-known examples of racial injustice in our country are redlining. And that is the racially discriminatory practice, lending practice, that denied mortgages, loans, insurance coverage to Black families. And it encouraged white flight, what's known as white flight. So by denying African Americans loans, a lot of African Americans wanted to own a home. We know that home ownership is the primary way that working class and middle class people accumulate generational wealth. So early in the 20th century, well, up through the mid 20th century, there was a practice called purchasing homes on contract. So a Black buyer of a home had to go through this middleman who would sell the home to the person, but there was no equity gained on the home for the entire time that the home was being paid off. And if the family fell behind with just one payment, they risked losing the home altogether and losing the hefty down payment. So it was a predatory agreement. At the same time that this was happening, white families were being told, you should move out of this neighborhood because African-American families are going to move in, and that's going to drop the value of your home. So that further increased segregation, and it made it easier for government, real estate to literally look at maps and outline in a red pen which were the neighborhoods that they would divest from. And so a study showed that just 3 generations later, redlined neighborhoods, the wealth, the equity of those homes are worth half of what non-redline districts are worth. That was in the 90s. So today, if we look at the wealth gap, we see that African Americans make up 13% of the US population, but hold less than 3% of the wealth in the United States. So we like to make these historical connections because things don't just happen today without a history in a vacuum. This is a map of San Francisco, the redlined districts. And redlining occurs across various industries. There's what's called educational redlining, there's business loan redlining. A recent watchdog group, for example, did a study and filled out several applications, many applications requesting loans, and all factors being equal, except for one, there was a very different outcome on the kind of credit and the interest that they got for that loan. And borrowers, the one factor that was different was where they had attended school. So it's illegal to deny someone a loan or base their interest rate on the loan based on their race. But the way to get around that is that alum from historically Black colleges and universities, if they identified that they attended a historically Black college or university, such as Howard, or Latinos signaled that they were graduates of a Hispanic serving institution. Those are colleges and universities that have over 25% Latino population. Those borrowers were basically penalized with a higher interest rate on their loan. And so this is a way of redlining as well. And of course, we have business loan redlining, where loans are denied to businesses based on the area where they want to open their business. So it overlaps with race.
So the past is really important. And I want to take a few moments to talk about CRT because there's so much in the news today. And I want, the two of us want to clarify what it is and why it is important and why opposing CRT is racial injustice. So CRT, critical race theory, is a theoretical framework, an approach, an academic and legal concept. It was designed for students in law schools and advanced graduate programs to examine the reality that the history of white supremacy in the United States has made a lasting impact on our society and institutions. One example is redlining. CRT posits that racism is embedded in American institutions, and that consequently, rules, regulations, and procedures lead to different outcomes by race. That is, CRT posits that institutions in the United States are inherently, systematically, and structurally racist and riddled with unconscious bias, privilege, discrimination, and oppression. So CRT is not a commentary on individual Americans. Racism in American institutions can exist and does exist without individual racists. CRT is not a program, it's not a training, it's not a curriculum. It is a way of understanding our America. And really, it's a way of understanding equity in the world. So Kimberly Crenshaw, a founding scholar of CRT, explained it again just a couple of months ago, last May. She says, quote, critical race theory just says, let's pay attention to what has happened in this country and how what has happened in this country is continuing to create differential outcomes so that we can become that country that we say we are. So critical race theory is not anti-patriotic. In fact, it is more patriotic than those who are opposed to it, because we believe in the 13th and the 14th and the 15th Amendment. We believe in the promises of equality. And we know we can't get there if we can't confront and talk honestly about inequality. Unquote. In other words, CRT asks us, all of us, to look honestly and comprehensively at the realities of who we are, who we have been, who we want to be as Americans, and to deny that process, to deny that reality is social injustice.
But I want to highlight that CRT is not a curriculum, it's not a training, it's not a program, as Dr. Gray mentioned. In fact, CRT, this theory isn't even made available to the general public. It is taught in law school and advanced graduate studies programs. It is not in our K through 12 system, as we're now hearing on the media, and school districts are moving to ban it. But we then have to ask ourselves, how are these terms conflated? And I'd like to address that, because it's known that, oops, Christopher Rufo, who is a right-wing activist, writer, influencer, he basically has gone on Fox News and he has said, we have successfully frozen their brand, critical race theory. into the public conversation and are steadily driving up negative perceptions, we will eventually turn it toxic as we put all of the various cultural insanities under that brand category. And by cultural insanities, he's referring to anything that has to do with talking about our racial history, of equity, of diversity and inclusion. All of those terms were intentionally co-opted. Furthermore, he says, the goal is to have the public read something crazy in the newspaper and immediately think critical race theory. We have decodified the term and will recodify it to annex the entire range of cultural constructions that are unpopular with Americans. And that is part of what we now know as the Southern strategy, right? Taking a term and co-opting it to really mean something else. And so we have to ask ourselves, what can we do? Thank you very much for your time, and we welcome your questions.
We also have some resources at the end of our presentation that will make available to everyone if you want to explore, and we encourage you to explore further. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I think it's back to me. Okay. So our next presentation is What is California Doing to Resolve Racial Problems by Dr. Shirley Weber. Shirley Nash Weber has a PhD, was nominated to serve as California Secretary of State by Governor Gavin Newsom on December 22nd, 2020, and sworn into office on January 29th, 2021. She is California's first Black Secretary of State and only the fifth African-American to serve as a state constitutional officer in California's 170-year history. She has her degrees from all of her degrees, a bachelor's degree, master's degree, and a PhD from UCLA. She will be talking during her presentation a great deal more about herself. So I give you Weber, and our first question for her is, what are your personal experiences with racial justice?
Well, it's difficult to identify just my personal experiences as one or just even a few, because the question of race is always and ever in the forefront of an African-American's mind, as well as on the minds of others. It's not one of those things so often that you can hide, that as soon as you walk in the room, the first thing people notice about you is that you are African-American, and maybe later on that you're female. But the reality is that continues and will continue, and it continues to impact others' perception of you and how you interact with others in terms of that. It takes a while for people to adjust and to realize that maybe you're not that different, especially those who haven't had a lot of personal and professional contact with people of color. So an African-American in this country is forever conscious of his status. And at the same time has to be, because of the expectations of others, the negative images, the negative concepts that others may have, as was pointed out earlier, has to be forever on guard about how they interact, because clearly they are combating a tremendous number of racial stereotypes. My son often talks about the fact that he's a very tall, he's 6'6" or 6'7", African-American male, physical, tall person. And he says immediately when he walks in the room, his responsibility immediately is to disarm those around him and make them think that he's a really nice guy. And he is. But the fact that the image that he would be rough and difficult and hard means that he has to spend a significant amount of his initial time overcoming the racial stereotypes, and that comes with being a tall, dark African-American male in a work environment. And that's a reality that we have to deal with. And I'm sure you most have heard lots of stories about all the things that happens when you are being judged a certain way and others believe otherwise. As a student at UCLA, for all the years that I was there, I was constantly in conflict with images and stereotypes about how far I would go and where I would go. And in many ways, completely ignored because people felt I would not stay there very long, that I would obviously flunk out, that I wouldn't make it through. And even when I demonstrated that I could pass their classes and get A's and those kinds of things and accomplish the goals in a rather quick period of time, people still did not believe it was possible, didn't believe whatever was happening was real. And at one point in my life, tried to throw me out of grad school because I was going rather quickly. And I went actually quickly through grad school out of neglect, the fact that they never counseled me. They never gave me information. They never included me in what one would consider the graduate experience. And so not knowing any better and, living in South Central LA, I just went to school and took all the classes I needed to take. I actually took 12 credits in graduate school, sometimes 16, when you're only supposed to take 4 and 8. And as a result, finished my entire coursework on my doctorate in a little over a year, which was shocking. And when that happened, then they decided the best thing to do was to throw me out of grad school, which they made an effort to do, based strictly on no data, no information, based on the principle that they didn't think I would finish, even though I had finished. I had actually completed the work before everyone else that entered with me, as well as other doctoral students. So when I went to meet with the chair of the department, he said, "We just want you to leave." I mean, literally said, "We want you to leave." And I said, "And go where?" And he goes, "Well, just leave the program." I said, "Why?" He said, "We don't think you're finished." I'd only been in the program a little over a year. I was at that time an assistant professor at San Diego State University. I'd been appointed to a position that many of them had, and they wanted me to leave. And they said, in the end, they said, "We don't think you'll ever finish, and we don't think anybody wants to be on your committee." And I had not asked anyone to be on my committee yet, other than Dr. Asante. And so it became really almost a battle. I had to threaten to sue the University of California in order to finish my doctorate. Because they originally, and even the dean of graduate school said to me, "You understand, Miss Weber, you cannot be in grad school more than 8 years." At the time, I think I was 23 or 24. And I said, "Do you understand I haven't been out of high school 8 years? And I already have 2 of your degrees." Then he had to back up and says, "Well, in order to remain in grad school, you have to have at least a 3.0 GPA. I had like a 3.75 or 3.8, whatever it was. So my husband had graduated from UCLA Law School, and he threatened to sue them because we had satisfied the contract, which was a catalog of the university, and we were going to file an injunction against the University of California in the next morning, at which point they decided that they couldn't put obstacles in my way. So the issue of race is always present because even when you've done the right thing, I went to undergrad, went through, got my bachelor's, there was a Woodrow Wilson Fellow, all those kinds of things, all those things that were there that were indicated. There was never an inclusion of me into the intellectual community at UCLA. And when I got almost ready to finish and they realized at the age of 24, I was staring out at a PhD at the door of finishing my doctorate, they began to throw obstacles in my way. "You won't pass your language exam." I hadn't even taken it, took it and passed it. And yet every other person who had been in that program had been coddled, cared for, took years and years to finish. I finished my doctorate in 3 years or 4 years or whatever it was. And the only reason why it took so long was because I knew they would let me out before I turned at the age of 25. So the issue of race was always present. Expectation, low expectation, things in the classroom. These things immediately discourage people if you're not grounded in something other than the institution and the values that they have there. We continue to fight those battles everywhere we go as African Americans, even as a legislator, until you become well-known, until you become someone that people look at and respect. There's always a sense of a suspect as to whether or not you're able to accomplish it. So my experiences with race and the injustice has continued which means I've been in an internal battle for racial and social justice for myself, for my children, for young men in California. And we still fight those battles. People still have a tendency to judge us more harshly, to make life much more difficult, to not give us the benefit of the doubt, that if you go into a space, the assumption is that you will be better and you have to be twice as good, if not 3 times as good. We've taught that as a kid, which is really an unfair reality for most people, because most people are not twice as good as other people. They're just as good as other people. And there are a few who may be twice as good, but when you have to have the reality that you have to be twice as good, it means that it justifies people discriminating against you. And I tell people all the time, I'm tired of telling young Black people that they have to be twice as good, because as long as I tell them that, that will continue to promote the idea that they are that there's something wrong with them, that they have to continue to be twice as good, but that's there. Thurgood Marshall, once we were in a meeting together, said that, he said, justice is when the poorest kid, he said, and sometimes the darkest kid in America has the same opportunities and chances as the most wealthiest kid in this nation. He said, that's when we have achieved justice. But as long as we have these barriers that are based on race and color and economics, that those become the determining factors, then we have injustice. And we see that all around us. The fact that, if I am on the board of trustees at the University of California, my kids can get into the University of California regardless of what their GPA is like. And yet there are those who struggle very hard and get close to the standard and can't get in. And we continue to justify this whole issue of, well, it's the trustees, it's legacy, it's this, it's that, it's who gave money to the university. All those things continue to perpetuate the inadequacies and the injustices that are there. And we have to look at it very carefully as a community, because as long as that becomes the driving force for most of us in terms of racial justice, that's going to be a continued challenge for us. And it has not gone away. We may have, and in fact, one of the biggest injustices we experience, racial injustices, so often people believe, when I was dealing with the issue of reform in terms of the police department, that for a police officer to be accepted among his peers, he has to be very mean to Black people. And when he is, then he's seen as one of the group. It's like a rite of passage. He has to be harder and more difficult on Blacks than someone white. And then he's one of the buddies in the field. And that continues to perpetuate the injustice and inadequacies that we see every day in our judicial system and everything else. So those are the things I could go on with my personal experiences of dealing with race, but I want you to get to question number 2, because it is an ongoing challenge, and it has not gone away, no matter how high I get in the ladder, no matter whether I'm Secretary of State, President of the United States, Kamala Harris, doesn't matter. You're still going to be faced with these issues of race and the injustices that happen, and your unconscious efforts always to overcome the challenges you face, because there are additional ones as a result of your race and your gender.
Next slide. Here we are. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
As Secretary of State, what are your goals with respect to racial justice?
Well, one of the things, a couple of things. One, within the structure itself, in the Secretary of State's office, within the structure, I make sure that our organization is a reflection of California, that we have persons, because I believe there's talent in every group, every race, every age group that's there, every gender. And so if you go into the Secretary of State's office, you will find folks in leadership positions of all of the various colors that are there, that are represented in California, as well as all the ages that are there, because we have some who worked for the government for many, many years. And then I have some really firecracker young people who have worked, who are out of high school for 2 or 3 years and are doing some amazing work. So I do my best to make sure that there is that is a reflection of it, so that we don't find ourselves talking out of one thing, our mouth out of one point, and doing something different. Because the Secretary of State's office has a responsibility to maintain the data of women on boards and now people of color on boards. And how can we tell corporations that you need to diversify your boardmanship if we have not diversified ours? And so we make it our task to do that. The other piece is, as an educator, I feel very strongly that a significant amount of the challenges we face right now in California is a lack of information about the past. That we have somehow or another, and I know the critical race theory is there, and people, and fortunately we're pushing that while other people are pushing in a different direction. But, it becomes important that people know, because if you don't know where you've been, then you have no idea where you're going, and any road will take you there if you don't know how to get there. And so what we've begun to do, and we'll kick off our first one, I think, in Fresno on September 28th. I'm going around the state. We're going to do some things at universities and in communities and town halls concerning the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Because as we talk about the franchise of voting, voting is extremely powerful. It is the one way in which we can work hard to ensure that there's equity, there's racial justice, justice, there's freedom for everyone. If everyone in California has the right to vote, and voting is such a powerful thing because it doesn't matter who you are. You can, if you are Joe Biden, you get one vote, just like Joe Blow. You get one vote. That's it. He's not going to get a prorated vote because he's president of the United States. That's not what America does. And so we all end up with one vote. This is the most equalizing reality and the empowering reality that's there, because clearly if everyone exercised their right to vote, that would happen. So unfortunately, we're in a time now where people are putting up a lot of things against us in terms of voter suppression. And it becomes very difficult. It's going to be difficult for people to vote, and we have to realize how far we've come. And the language that we use is where we talk about, back in the day you had literacy tests and so forth and so on. Now you're going to have voter ID tests. You're going to have other kinds of tests, other kinds of barriers that are there based on what people talk about, equity, and we want to ensure that it's a safe election. We do not have an unsafe election, but these are solutions in search of a problem. And as a result, we're going to find ourselves once again in a situation pretty much like they have in the South, but we're going to do it in a different way. We're getting people now writing resolutions and propositions to go on the ballot that will accomplish what they're trying to accomplish in Texas and Georgia in terms of limiting people's right to vote, making it more difficult for people to vote at a time when we have worked to make it easier for people to vote and have seen no fraud. But what we have seen is a great turnout of those who have traditionally been left out and locked out of the system and are trying to get their justice. And as a result, they're going to make it harder for us to do it. So as a Secretary of State, we're working to expand that. More recently, my folks have been working really hard to expand the voting participation of people around California. And the Policy Institute came out the other day and said that we are about almost at 90% of all eligible individuals in California are registered to vote, which would be amazing if we're 90% and we're like 98 point something, 88 point something percent of those who are eligible to vote are actually registered. So we're in high schools, wherever we're trying to, one, educate people about voting, help them to understand how long it has taken us to get to this place for women to vote, for people of color to vote, to remove those barriers, and then to register those individuals to vote. That is critical for us because if we're going to have a population, we need an educated population, one that understands the games that are currently being played, but equally important, people who are prepared and ready to participate in the process to ensure their own justice.
Thank you. I want to remind folks that they can put their questions in the chat room. The third question, what are the legal reforms being made in California that will affect racial justice?
Well, we are, California has in the last few years, we've done some things that are really, really important where others have done different things. One, we have opened up the franchise of voting. As I said, almost 90% of all eligible persons in California are registered to vote right now. And my goal is 100 because I don't think 90 is good enough. And so we've been pushing that. And most of you know the voting Prop 17, I was the co-author on Prop 17, basically open up the franchise of voting so that we end up with every person who's not in a state or federal prison actually eligible to vote. And we've seen the registration of those individuals who are constantly working to make sure that happens. And so those are California has done a number of reforms that in the last 7 or 8 years that have opened up the opportunity to vote in California. In addition to that, California is beginning to deal with the issue of race itself in terms of our Native Americans. They've established a commission to work on the issues and the inclusion of Native Americans in the voting process, those kinds of things. And the governor has established a special commission to deal with that. We passed a reparations law. That is amazing because other states are running from reparations. California is running to it. And what is happening is those who want to should listen to the hearings. I think there's one next week that really begins to address the critical issues of race in California, beginning to look at how people's land was taken, beginning to look at the injustices that have existed in our judicial system. And as a result, we'll produce some things that will come out that will challenge us to do different kinds of things. In addition to that, as we talk about critical race theory, other states are saying you can't teach it, you can't have that as a part of it. We have that's coming out of these legislatures. What does California do? California then I authored AB 3121, which really is our bill to talk about No, that was reparations, but the other bill, 1460, was to talk about ethnic studies in our community colleges. Every student who graduates from the Cal State University, which is the largest public institution in the world, will have at least 3 units of ethnic studies. That is an amazing accomplishment, because while others are saying, no, we don't want to talk about it, we don't want to deal with it, we are equipping our students who go to college to basically come out with some information on the various ethnic groups, and it's required in order to graduate, and they will then impact the communities and impact the school system that is there, because most of our teachers in California come out of the Cal State University. And so here we have the largest, 500,000 students in California are in the CSU system. They're going to be exposed to ethnic studies. And then in addition to that, we just passed the bill with regards to our K-12. The K-12 community, and hopefully the governor will sign it, will also be required to teach ethnic studies as well. So what we're doing is trying to equip our young people with information about ethnic studies. And I've been on a number of panels with the high school advisory group, with the state superintendent of instruction. And these young people are eager for this information. They want to know their history. They want to know other people's history, and they're eager for that. California now has that as its law, and it will impact the future of young people to come. And that is a sea change difference from what is happening around the nation with regards to their concern about critical race theory and not wanting to expose our young people to the true information about all of Californians and the history of California and its participation in the racial injustices. You're muted. I can't hear you. You're muted.
Thank you very much.
You're muted again.
Okay, if we could go to question number 4. What do you see as prospects for additional changes in the future?
You know, I would love to be probably more optimistic than I am. And I say that with caution, because I am optimistic over the things that we've done. My greatest concern is that we have a tendency to achieve things and try to rest on our laurels and go back to the ways that we've had in the past. You know, my position continues, as I tell young folks everywhere, that, you know, these issues of social justice, racial justice are like rare flowers that have to be constantly watered, nurtured, pruned, and cared for if you want a beautiful garden. But hatred and discrimination and exclusion and those kinds of things are weeds, and they grow best in neglect. And when we decide that we're tired, that we're not going to continue to raise the issues of racial justice or issues of gender and those kinds of things because it's uncomfortable, or we think we've gotten there already, or we've accomplished our goals, when we decide to do that and we rest on our laurels, we slide backwards. And, you know, while we look at California, we say, well, California is really progressive. We have done so many wonderful things, and we have still pushing the agenda for social justice and all these kinds of things that are there. We have to be careful, because right now, sitting in my office is a proposal for a proposition to go on the ballot next year that will have that will make for voter ID. And there will be others that will be coming forward. And those things we know are just code words for Jim Crow laws about voting, that you have to have this, or you have to have that. And many of the times the language is targeted toward what they call the undocumented immigrant, who is, quote, in their mind, voting that is not voting. And yet it creates the fear that's there, and the fear mongering that we saw in the last election, we'll see in elections to come. And it's really important that people don't believe that we are in the wonderful land of California and that we can rest, because what is happening in other states that they can't get through our legislature, they will get through the proposition methodology. And we should be very cautious of that and ever armed and prepared to educate the public and to fight against these small things that creep into us, as they did with Prop 209 and others that are there, that really take us back instead of pushing us forward to an environment of racial justice. So I think it's critically important that with all the things we're doing, we continue to do, that we continue to educate, we continue to have these activities, because even though it looks like we're doing a great job, and we are, there are those out there who are actually still organized to take it back. And we have to be determined not to go there.
Okay. Those are the questions that we had for you that you answered in such an articulate and interesting way. We're now going to deal with questions from the audience, and there are some that are beginning to show up. And the first one was for the folks from West Valley. When did West Valley College start, and why did it start the social justice major?
So we are actively working on that. There are several faculty members in the Department of English, including Lee Burrill, Rebecca, myself, Lenore Harris, who've worked on it. And it's been probably about 4 or 5 years. But I personally have always taught, and my pedagogy is founded on social justice studies, and my training is in that as well. So for me, it's always been since I've been at West Valley College. But for the program, it's fairly new. It's gotten some really good feedback. And for the ethnic studies, that's also just being born. We're working on it. Rebecca?
Thank you for pointing out that you and several of us have been informally really teaching social justice and social justice theories and approaches in all of our curriculum. But as a program, I mean, we were the first, I think, community college to have women gender studies. Well, back then it was women's studies, and now it's grown, it's evolved, and we're continuing to get support to grow it. So initially we started with the branch under social justice of women gender studies, and then it grew into women gender queer studies. Now we launched our first social justice class this last spring, because there's a real need. And so we have the faculty working on it. Lee Burrill, Julie Maya have been working on it for years. And so we're glad to have the support now, and are looking to offer ethnic studies courses next year.
Okay. Have any of the gender studies and racial studies or ethnic studies gotten into the history courses that we offer at West Valley College? This is, of course, my question.
So our social justice studies program and women and gender and queer studies program and our forthcoming ethnic studies program have all been moved to the School of Social Sciences. And so I think that we will have some work so that not just the classes in social sciences are infused with these precepts, but hopefully the whole curriculum, all the curricula at West Valley College will have that. And we've had some pretty good conversations. We've moved a lot in the last 10 years from there being very little diversity to having all sorts of co-curricular activities, and that enhance everyone's life.
Yes, well, I remember history books that were still saying how wonderful slave masters were to slaves in history. So it's one of the things having read a lot of Once Upon a Time, it's been one of my things. From Tim Kelly, who was I believe, a professor of history at West Valley College. Here's a comment. I have a comment about one of the slides regarding CRT. Let's see if I can get back there. Yeah. Opposition to Marxism does not mean one favors worker exploitation. So why should we assume that opposition to critical race theory must therefore be racial injustice? Critical race theory is a theory, one of many in the pantheon of theories that seek to understand race in society. Shouldn't promoters of CRT be open to thoughtful criticism of their positions rather than shutting down debate over CRT with statements such as opposition to critical race theory is racial injustice. After all, people with shared interest in fighting racial and social injustice can have theoretical differences of opinion. And I give this over to Dulce and Rebecca. Although I'm sure Dr. Weber would like to pitch in a bit, perhaps.
I'll say briefly that claiming the truth that it is unjust to try to shut some people down and to shut our very hurtful past in the United States and our very hurtful present is injustice. If you want to keep the past somehow hidden, is injustice. And I don't think that critical race theory is opposed to any sort of debate. Certainly I'm not. And I've been involved with critical race theory since I was in grad school, which was a million years ago. So I am not. I think that we listen. But when you have the Southern, as Rebecca explained, intentional aim to make critical race theory into something dirty, into something wrong, into something offensive, and you legislate it, like many states have done, that's an affront. That is war. And I don't think that, I certainly wouldn't just take it lying down. So I don't know.
Yeah, I'll jump in, I'll add that. So by definition, critical race theory moves away from looking at individual acts of racism to look at systemic, legislatively supported acts to block and prevent, right, the conversations or the opportunities. And so I agree with you, Tim, that it is a theory and it is up for discussion, but when you have school districts basically banning it, that in itself is censorship. And it is censorship that is coming from people in power. And that's the way I see it. So if there is a district banning it, and really not even banning it, but banning what has been distorted to be critical race theory, it is not even allowing people to have that critical engagement and discussion or debate about the theory.
Thank you. And Dr. Weber, do you have anything that you would like to say on that issue?
Sure. You know, I understand the gentleman's comment, and I appreciate it because it is a theory, but it is also, it's up for conversation. And I think the affront that most folks feel, and myself as well, is that when someone can't necessarily prove the theory wrong, but decide that the way they will deal with it is not to discuss it and not to deal with it and not to have open dialogue about it, but to simply legislate that it cannot happen. And once you do that, then you really shut out any potential that anyone has of not only discussing it, but hopefully altering it, changing it, making it better, putting it in its proper place in discussion, all those kinds of things. And so, you know, those of us in academia resist censorships, because even if a theory is wrong, it is worth conversation. It is worth discussing. And I, in all of my students' class, all of my classes when I taught for 40 years at San Diego State, I encourage students to challenge me. You know, to challenge my ideas, to challenge the concepts that we had, because in the process, they learn and they grow and they develop. I always tell them, however, if you're going to challenge me and if you go into war, you better come with more than one bullet. You come prepared because you get wiped out in this war of ideas. But you know, the issue is, why are you so afraid of critical race theory that you can't even have it discussed? And that I think is troublesome. Because at that point, you know, you're shutting people out from any ideas, whether it's a critical race theory, whether it's socialism, capitalism, all of those things that we supposedly discuss so we can better understand who we are. And if our position in the world is that fragile, then I can understand why you fear it, because you obviously don't want to be in a position to defend it. But I think, you know, at least I've discovered that the opposition is not about critical race theory itself, and only everybody has to pay homage to it. It's a fact that people should be allowed to discuss it, and research
all
it.
three of you.
Mhm.
And the next question is for Dr. Weber. What do you think is the most effective way to change the hearts and minds of people? Ray, the need to recognize and address racial justice issues.
There are a whole lot of things that people say, like if you walk a mile in my shoes and you understand, blah, 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 blah. And the reality is that's true. You can't change. It's difficult to change the hearts of people at a distance. It happens up close. And it happens when you have an interaction with people and you understand and feel their challenges that they face. The friends of mine who have really embraced the issues of social justice oftentimes have actually had friends whose sons have been mistreated by police officers. And they walk that walk with them to try to get justice and discover how difficult it is to get justice. So I think the efforts years ago to try to integrate our schools and so forth and so on, had certain value to it. We don't do much of that anymore. To neighbors and integration of neighborhoods and places where people live and work is critically important, because it's difficult to hate people that you know. It's easy to hate people you don't know. And it's easy to put people and stereotype people that you have no idea who they are. And so it becomes really important that people recognize that in order for us to overcome the racism that we feel, we're going to have to really interact with people that we generally don't interact with, not just the folks we see every day, but people who are different race, different gender, who have different challenges in their lives, who are different economics. When you get into that level and you understand that, then you really can begin to break down the barriers that are there. But it doesn't happen by legislation at all. It will happen by opportunity. And oftentimes it will happen because you make the opportunity. And instead of waiting for people of color to make the opportunity, I encourage my white friends, you make the opportunity, because people of color have done it for so long and been rejected that many of them don't want to do it anymore. But you make the opportunity. You move into the communities where Black people live and Latinos live. You put your children in schools where Black kids go and fight those battles to get social justice for all kids. You put yourself in that position where you then have to understand it. And at that point, when we do that, you begin to grow as an individual and you change your whole view of the world. And I've seen friends who've done that, who intentionally go to Black churches, who intentionally moved into neighborhoods that were diverse because they wanted their children to grow up knowing other people and not growing up with stereotypes and fear.
Okay. The next question comes from Lee Burrell, an instructor at West Valley College, and I think in the English department. The insidiousness of the smear campaign against CRT, critical race theory, and of the campaign to limit access to voting across the nation is sickening to me, and I'm sure many Americans in our increasingly divided nation. How do we as individuals illuminate this insidiousness to our immediate community and to the larger population? And how do we do so with those who are so propagandized that they are blind to reality of what's going on? Tough question. Who would like to start?
I can say briefly that I really agree with a lot of the work that's been done. I mean, people as far back as James Baldwin, who talks about there being a fear of losing your stance, of losing the status quo, of losing your power, of being considered a bad person because you somehow have been oppressing others because your great-grandparents did it or whatever. I think that I think that for me, the solution as an educator is to put that on the table and to have honest, courageous conversations all of the time. And those are dangerous because, especially in this milieu today, where if it's happened to me personally, you say something in the classroom and you're accused of all sorts of things. But I think that we have to take that risk. And one solution is very much what CRT is proposing, is that we discuss things, that we look underneath that, underneath the tablecloth and see what's there. And that conversation has power.
I think one of the things we see that's happening in this nation right now, and I so much agree with the previous speaker, that people are afraid to step out and to stand out. And during the Holocaust, people said and King said it's not the voices of my enemy, but it's the silence of my friends. Mm-hmm. And we're in a very critical period in this nation, where everything we worked for the last 150 years is at risk. That folks through misinformation campaigns, trying to stoke fear. We have a protest going on in Washington right now concerning those who were for January 6th. And we're in a very critical period, and we cannot afford to be silent. We cannot afford to not have these conversations in our neighborhoods, around our dinner table, with our children, with our grandchildren, to help them understand exactly where we are in this country. It is unfortunate that folks don't want to have those conversations, or equally important that many of our elected officials in Washington are at least my great concern is that of the silence of so many who refuse to take stands against the injustices that exist. That why do we have to discuss it? Let's move on to something else, because they fear the rejection of others. And it's that kind of silence that gave rise to Hitler and his whole regime and the things that happened there. It's what happened on plantations and Jim Crow laws in the South. And people knew things were wrong, and that they just figured if I close my eyes and turn my back and keep living like I'm living, I can be okay because I don't have to face my neighbors and my friends and those that are there. It is critically important that those who have the feeling and the belief of this democracy and why it is so important that every person counts, that we embrace each other, that we have to understand the challenges we face, that you must speak up and you must speak out. It is real clear. And that doesn't mean you have to join every movement there is, but it should be clear in your neighborhood. It should be clear in your churches. It's kind of like when people used to tell racial jokes or sex jokes. And when somebody says, I don't do that, please don't do that around me. It changes the atmosphere of those that are there. But if you're silent and you cringe when they do it and you just walk away, they will continue to do it because your silence is giving consent. And we have to stand up. And it has to come from more than just people of color. It has to come from more than just women. It is time for white men to really take up the banner and defend the democracy that so many of us have fought to have and to expand and to grow. And it will come from them as they fight alongside of us and with us through these challenges. But it is not a time to be silent. It is not a time to go away. I see it every day coming across my desk. I see it in the protests. I see it in the attacks on my office, the cybersecurity issues with me. I see it everywhere. And it is extremely important that we stand up and that we fight for this democracy that so many of our ancestors fought for. And it will not happen if you keep silent. And I tell my friends all the time, this is not a time for silence. It is not a time for indifference. This is a time to fight.
A last question as we begin to run out of time. I was wondering, this comes from Ansh. I was wondering what the board thought about affirmative action. I think they see the three of you as the board.
Well, everybody should know what I think about it since I got the initiative passed and got it on the ballot, Prop ACA 5 last year, that turned into Prop 16. California has to reckon with its issue of affirmative action, because when you talk the issue of equity, and which was beautifully demonstrated at the beginning, we are still in a society, we're still in a place where we have tremendous amount of poverty, tremendous amount of poor quality education. We have inequity in terms of economic opportunity and all those kinds of things. And it will not just happen on its own. It will happen because California decides to do as other states have done, to intentionally and affirmatively work to change the dynamics that are in this country, in the state, and to provide equal opportunity and access for women and for minorities. It was unfortunate that Prop 16 failed. The greatest beneficiary of Prop 16 would have been white women. And unfortunately, they didn't see it. All of them did not see it and rally around this issue of women because of the amount of resources that are being lost in this state as a result of having no affirmative efforts to encourage women to do investments and so forth and so on, as we've seen in other states, is really unfortunate. But it's once again the divide and conquer mentality that allowed Prop 16 to fail. We will continue to fight that battle. I never get discouraged, never give up, never give out.
Any other would like to comment?
Actually,
Okay.
I would like to say something. I was just thinking when you were just speaking, Dr. Weber, about a conversation that Rebecca and I were having about the work of Derek Bell. And I went and I watched a YouTube video, and it's so frustrating because just the same as with James Baldwin and so many other activists, they were speaking 50, 60 years ago.
Right.
And we're still dealing with the same thing, if not intensified. And it can be so discouraging, so discouraging. But when we were talking about, and Rebecca, chime in, but what I felt was that this is our life, right? This is my life, it's my turn. And so even if we're dealing with the same thing over and over again, it's my turn. It's my turn to fight. It's my turn to work. It's my turn to do what's right. And so even though I may be tired that, I got to do it. So.
Okay, well, we'd like to thank the presenters, and I'd like to turn it back over to Eleanor Yick to wrap it up for us.
Thank you, Wade. And again, on behalf of the League of Women Voters, I would like to thank you, Dr. Weber, for taking time out of your very busy schedule and sharing with us today your real life experiences, your personal reflections, the legal battles that we have to fight and that we have fought and need to continue to fight, as the League of Women Voters has done so progressively over the years, and your academic perspective on this issue. I'd also like to thank Dr. Gray and Ms. Cisneros-Diaz for your perspective, your academic perspective that you brought to the conversation this morning. I know as a local resident here, I was really surprised, and pleasantly, I will say surprised, to learn that West Valley is offering this social justice course of study, something that I think is so important. I think our program today was extremely powerful. Some thoughts that I take away from it when I'm looking for ideas is, your comments in particular, Dr. Weber, resonate so much with the League on voter suppression issues. And your vote is the great equalizer. It's one vote.
You're muted somehow, Eleanor. I don't know how you got muted, but you're muted.
No, I don't think I'm muted. Anyhow, in conclusion, I would like to, again, thank our speakers today. And I would like to point out to those of you who attended today that a recording was made of this, and it will be posted to our website. It will also be a YouTube video that people can view. We do have a number of slides that we can share with you, but I do want to point out a perfect segue. We are doing a program on voter suppression in October. It's October 16th at 10 a.m. The speaker will be Ann Ravel, another vice president in our league, and also we'll be viewing the movie called Rigged, the Voter Suppression Playbook, narrated by Jeffrey Wright. So we would like to invite you all to tune in and come back in October as we continue this very important discussion of racial justice in our society. And Sophia, are you going to show the additional links that are available? Again, you can go into our website, you can go into the Santa Clara County League of Women Voter website, and I believe you have another list of links here. You can also connect with us specifically and other leagues through all of these postings that you see here. And again, these will be part of the video that is posted or the recording that is posted. So in conclusion, again, thank you so much, Dr. Weber, Dr. Gray, and Ms. Rebecca Cisneros-Diaz. Thank you.
So this will conclude our webinar today. Thank you everyone for your participation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.